Dietrich Bonhoeffer was born on February 4, 1906, in Breslau, Germany, modern-day Wrocław, Poland. He and his twin sister were number 6 and 7 of 8 children from a highly intellectual family. His father was a prominent psychiatrist and neurologist, and his mother, the granddaughter of a Protestant theologian, was deeply committed to Christian education. At the young age of 14, and despite criticism from his older brothers, Bonhoeffer decided to pursue an education in theology, earning his doctorate at 21 with a dissertation titled Sanctorum Communio, meaning the communion of saints, which explored the church as a community of believers. Bonhoeffer traveled to New York in 1930 to study at Union Theological Seminary. He was deeply disheartened by the apathetic American theology. He described the students as lacking interest in theology and would laugh out loud when learning a passage from Martin Luther's Sin and Forgiveness. However, he was introduced to the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, an African-American church, through Frank Fisher, an African seminarian. There, he encountered and formed a lifelong love for the theology of social justice that would later shape his resistance to Nazism. When Dietrich Bonhoeffer attended Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, he was deeply influenced by African-American church traditions. He encountered a form of Christianity that deeply moved him, one that was vibrant, engaged in social justice, and spiritually alive in ways he did not find in most white churches. Here's what he found so compelling. Bonhoeffer was struck by how the African-American congregation at Abyssinian lived their faith in real, tangible ways. Unlike many of the intellectual, detached, and largely complacent white churches he had seen, the black church integrated faith with daily struggles, offering both spiritual sustenance and practical action for the oppressed. He was deeply moved by the passionate preaching, emotional engagement, and joyful singing in the services. The sermons were not dry theological discussions, but urgent calls to trust in God despite suffering and injustice. He especially admired the preaching of Dr. Adam Clayton Powell Sr. on gospel of social justice, who boldly addressed racial injustice and the Christian's role in resisting oppression. Bonhoeffer became deeply aware of the social unfairness faced by racial and ethnic minorities in the U.S. and the church's failure to promote integration. Abyssinian Baptist Church was not just a place of worship, but a hub for social activism. It ministered to the poor, fought for racial equality, and provided a theology of resistance against systemic injustice. Bonhoeffer saw a church that was deeply engaged with real-world suffering, unlike the passive and complicit churches in Germany that would later accommodate Hitler's rise. Bonhoeffer was struck by how African-American Christians, despite centuries of slavery, segregation, and oppression, had developed a deep and resilient faith. He saw their belief in God's justice and deliverance as a living testimony, far removed from the comfortable, status quo faith of many white-populated congregations. He also fell in love with Negro spirituals, a type of Christian folk music that originated with enslaved African Americans in the American South, which he collected and later shared with friends in Germany. These songs of sorrow, hope, and deliverance resonated deeply with his theological convictions, particularly as he later faced the oppression of the Nazi regime. Bonhoeffer's time at Abyssinian radicalized his faith. He returned to Germany with a new understanding of Christianity, one that was not just about doctrine but about action, sacrifice, and standing against injustice. He was determined to literally carry out the teachings of Christ as revealed in the Gospels. His experience in Harlem prepared him for his resistance to Hitler, as he had seen firsthand how a persecuted church could remain faithful and strong in the face of evil. His biggest takeaway? Faith must not remain passive, it must confront injustice with courage. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, Bonhoeffer quickly became an outspoken critic of the regime. In April of that year, Bonhoeffer was the first to call for church resistance against Hitler's persecution of the Jews, insisting that the church should do more than just bandage the victims under the wheel, but jam a spoke in the wheel itself. He was greatly appalled by the Nazi co-opting of the German church and its racist policies against Jews. He helped found the Confessing Church, a movement that opposed Nazi control of German Christianity. If you have watched this far, please like this video and consider subscribing to our channel so we can bring you more interesting content. Now back to our story. In 1937, Bonhoeffer published his most famous work, The Cost of Discipleship. In it, he contrasted cheap grace, which he described as grace without commitment, with costly grace, which demands sacrifice. This book became a manifesto for his faith, emphasizing that true discipleship involves suffering for Christ. Bonhoeffer took an increasingly active role in resisting the Nazi regime. In 1939, he returned to Germany from the United States, convinced that he could not abandon his fellow Germans during the crisis. By 1941, he endured unrelenting harassment by the Nazi authorities who banned him from speaking publicly, printing or publishing any material, and required him to routinely report his activities to the police. Meanwhile, through his brother-in-law, Hans von Dohnanyi, he joined the German military intelligence service called the Abwehr, which secretly included members of the resistance. Dohnanyi claimed that Bonhoeffer's extensive ecumenical connections could benefit Germany, thereby shielding him from being drafted into active military service. Together with his brother-in-law, he also worked to smuggle German Jews to Switzerland, using his position to cover anti-Nazi activities. Upon discovering the full extent of Nazi atrocities against the Jews and other minorities through the Abwehr, Bonhoeffer concluded that the ultimate question for a responsible man to ask is not how he is to extricate himself from this whole affair, but how the coming generation shall continue to survive and live for truth. He did not attempt to justify his actions, but instead wrote, "When a man takes guilt upon himself in responsibility, he imputes his guilt to himself and no one else. He answers for it. Before other men, he is justified by dire necessity. Before himself, he is acquitted by his conscience, but before God, he hopes only for grace." On the 5th of April 1943, Bonhoeffer, along with his brother-in-law Dohnanyi, was arrested and imprisoned for his involvement in helping Jews escape. He was imprisoned at Tegel prison in Berlin for a year and a half, where he remained dedicated to religious outreach, ministering to both his fellow prisoners and the guards. He continued to write and correspond with friends and family with the help of sympathetic prison guards. His prison writings were later published as letters and papers from prison. These reflections show his deep faith, love for humanity, and hope for a better future. In 1944, the failed July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, Operation Valkyrie, led to the arrest of many resistance members. On April 4th, 1945, the diaries of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, were discovered. Enraged by their contents, Hitler ordered the execution of the remaining Abwehr members. Finally, on April 9th, just weeks before the Allies liberated Germany and a day after his sentencing, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was executed by hanging at the Flossenburg concentration camp at the age of 39. Witnesses reported that he went to his death with calm faith, praying and comforting others around him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life continues to inspire Christians around the world. He is remembered for his unwavering faith, his willingness to sacrifice for others, and his courage in the face of evil. He displayed a strength and resilience that withstood and defied opposition, traits that are worthy of emulation by the Church. His writings, especially The Cost of Discipleship and Life Together, challenge believers to live out their faith authentically, even when it requires great personal cost. Bonhoeffer's story is a testament to the power of faith, integrity, and action in the face of injustice. His life exemplifies what it means to follow Christ, no matter the cost. Thank you for watching. For more incredible and awe-inspiring testimonies on men and women of faith, please like this video, share, and subscribe to Faith Reflections 247. Stay blessed.